Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Neil Paterson, the UK and EU have done a deal. So, what does it mean for you?
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts. The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.
Look, all Prime Ministers are fond of describing things they've done as historic, and Sir Keir Starmer is no different. He was positively beaming as he announced his deal with the EU and a new era for the UK.
Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is back on the world stage. Today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win.
Also basking in the positive vibes, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
What we have agreed today is historic. It will make a real difference to people in the UK and across our union. But the message we are sending to the world today is equally, if not more important. It is a message that at a time of global instability and when our continent faces the greatest threat it has for generations, we in Europe stick together.
It all feels just a bit pre-2016, which is ruffling some feathers. As part of the deal, freedom of movement and the right to fish in Britain's waters are now on the table. Brexiteers say this is less a reset with the EU than an outright betrayal of the Leave vote nearly 9 years ago. Of course, Reform's Nigel Farage has come out swinging, so too the Conservatives' Kemi Badenoch.
I am gobsmacked. This is a sellout. I mean, we spent 10 years on this, and he's taken us back to square one. The public, had a referendum, they gave an instruction. It's 10 years now. We should be using the opportunities of leaving the EU, not taking steps backwards.
Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, is down at Lancaster House. I mean, Tamara, you've been there. Just describe how this morning has unfolded. What's it been like?
So it's been a lovely sunny day at Lancaster House where the Prime Minister walked in with Ursula von der Leyen, other senior EU figures. There are Union Jack flags lining the Mall on the way here as they came in. The atmosphere was very warm. The Prime Minister started off by saying, this is the UK back on the world stage, making deals with our friends, making life better, building relationships. That was very much the vibe. It was, after all that combative period when the Conservatives were negotiating Brexit, now we are working together to make things easier. You had, for most of the morning, some pro-EU protesters outside singing songs. It really all did take me right back to 2018 when we were doing all this negotiating.
So, very, very warm reception for those EU figures arriving. I'm just wondering whether what's in the deal justifies it. So, Tamara, just take us through the detail.
The key bits of the deal from the UK side are, and Keir Starmer has, to be fair, said this since he got elected. He said he wants to negotiate the deal which makes life a lot easier for businesses who are exporting to the EU. As a result of what they've agreed today, particularly on exporting food and other farming type products, all the paperwork that was added to those as a result of Brexit, that adds to the prices that consumers pay in the shops. And some of the actual bans on some products, we couldn't export sausages or shellfish or several other products to Europe, one of our biggest markets. All of that is swept away. All of that becomes a lot easier. And the Prime Minister says with certainty that will mean lower prices in the shops, a better deal for our consumers, and a £9 billion boost to the economy. So the food deal for him is the key thing. What we have to do, though, is, and you'll remember all this from when we talked about Brexit endlessly, obey the EU's rules. We have to align, as they put it, with their standards. And who's in charge of their standards? Well, the EU, of which we're not members, and it's the European Court of Justice who oversees it. So we go back to being, as the Prime Minister's sort of critics would say, rule takers. But the Prime Minister thinks it's a price worth paying. What did the EU want in return for us getting this food deal? They wanted access to our fishing waters, and they've got that for 12 years, but the food deal is indefinite. So they are the key bits of the deal. There was also a deal on defence, which is going to be, the Prime Minister thinks, a big win. And there was talk of a scheme about youth mobility, which is quite interesting because the government were denying that until very recently.
Also a bit of a win if you fancy taking a foreign holiday this year, and indeed you're lucky enough to be able to take a foreign holiday.
Yes, that's right. Another thing that they were trumpeting as a win was the e-gates. You know how it's always quicker to kind of whiz through the e-gates than join the really long queue to have someone look at your passport, especially if there's a rather annoying kind of tour group ahead of you. Well, the Prime Minister says, as a result of this deal, British people will be able to use the e-gates across Europe. Now, European visitors to the UK, EU visitors to the UK can use our e-gates. We can in some airports, but it's certainly a bit of a lottery. And the Prime Minister said that some countries think, as a result of the Schengen rules, that they can't let us. So this document makes clear that they can. There's no legal barrier. Now, does that mean that every European airport is going to be frantically updating their systems in time for this summer holiday? Well, it's up to them to implement it, but he says this gives them the clear direction that they need. We actually spoke to the Prime Minister afterwards and pressed him on whether it would be ready for this summer, and he says he's pushing for all of these things to be done faster, but we'll see where we get to by the summer. I'd maybe not bank on it.
I mean, that's interesting, Tamara. I mean, if you'd listened to the government over the weekend, you'd have thought that this was a done deal, but yeah, there's still plenty of work to be done, and on that idea of youth mobility in particular.
So I think in every aspect of this deal, Neil, it's all a bit TBC. So how I described it on TV this morning is we're sitting down for the starters in this negotiation. We're not at the dessert and coffee stage. All of this has to be negotiated. So the food deal, yes, they've got agreement that they both want to do it, but it will have to go through Parliament. There might be all sorts of objections raised and exemptions here and there. Then you've got the e-gates. They've committed to making it happen, but each member state has to do it at its own pace. The defence deal, yes, they've agreed a big defence pact, and that is a sort of sign of how improved relations are between us and Europe. But as for the UK accessing this £150 billion fund, which is why we want to do the defence deal, that will take some time. We don't know exactly how long. So all of this is a bit TBC. But one of the most TBC bits of it is youth mobility. So you'll remember that for months the government have said we're absolutely not having a scheme for young people to travel in Europe and young Europeans to travel in the UK because of migration. We left free movement. We don't want to go there again. Then suddenly, about 2 weeks ago, the minister who's been in charge of these negotiations, Nick Thomas-Symonds, wrote an article saying, oh, hang on, we are open to it. Now, today we learn that that is going to be agreed, but we don't know how many, because the UK government wants that scheme capped. We don't know how long they'll be able to stay, and we don't know when it's starting. And there was very little clarity in the briefing we just had afterwards about any of those questions. So that is very much to be negotiated.
Tamara, OK, in simple terms, why does any of this matter? OK, speedy getting on a plane aside, I mean, how am I going to benefit from what has taken place today between the UK and the European Union?
I'll tell you why I think this really matters. We went through this whole traumatising period of Brexit. So we voted to leave the EU. There were all these negotiations. We finally left on terms which a lot of people were unhappy with, or even some of the people who were happy with them felt that they weren't then taken through in the best way. So Keir Starmer, who obviously wanted to remain in the EU, didn't want any of this, came in saying, I'm going to make things a lot easier. Everything's become quite difficult when it comes to exporting, when it comes to travelling through airports, when it comes to taking your pet on holiday. All these things, which everyone warned about during the referendum, have become too difficult. And so he says, I'm going to make them easier. I think the huge gamble that he's taking is that all those sovereignty questions, all those questions about whether we want the EU making the rules, whether we want to pay to be in these schemes, the government thinks that we'll be net better off as a result, but they come with a cost. He thinks that people are now beyond that. They just want to make it work. It doesn't really matter if the EU make the rules. Well, we'll see whether we then end up having endless discussions about the EU's rules, the exemptions that we want. and what we've given up in return, i.e. the fishing deal. So he thinks that we've moved on. A lot of people in tell opinion polls that they think that the Brexit deal has not worked out and they want it to be better. And there seems to be quite a lot of goodwill here. They see Keir Starmer as someone who wants to be close with the EU, especially with Donald Trump, especially with everything that's going on in Ukraine, and the UK seem to be, leading the fight there.
Sure, but of course all of that does suggest that there may well be some truth, some validity to the arguments that we're already hearing from the Brexiteers. In terms of that alignment with European Union rules, we are once again rule takers, not rule makers. I mean, what was the point of Brexit?
Yeah, the document is really clear on that we are aligning with the EU. Now, one of the big arguments, of course, made about this was if we align with the EU, if we accept all their rules, we won't be able to do trade deals. And so the card the Prime Minister can certainly play is, we've just done a trade deal with the US, we've done a deal with India. He can say, we are doing all these trade deals and it's not making a difference. Plus, a lot of the paperwork that came with Brexit is really holding back our businesses. What he consistently said over and over again in that press conference was, we need to move beyond this. We need to move beyond the stale arguments. We need to be thinking in a fresh way about all of this. But I think some people will think, is this a thin end of the wedge? Because new things come up all the time. For example, the EU are starting a scheme in the autumn called an entry-exit scheme. So as well as e-gates, you'll also have to give them your fingerprints when you travel, just once when the scheme gets up and running. We asked the question, have you negotiated us out of that? And they said, no, we haven't. So there's going to be new things that come up all the time. No doubt some people will say this is a can of worms we never wanted to get back into. But the Prime Minister is gambling that we've moved past it, and we'll see whether that gamble pays off. For some people, this is yet another betrayal, especially if the newspapers go back to sort of every week talking about how much we're paying into the EU, what we're getting out of it, what they've asked from us this time. And all of these things are yet to be negotiated. So this is by no means the end. We're going to hear about all these things endlessly. When are we getting into the Defence Pact? How many people are we going to have in the mobility scheme? So look, it takes us back somewhere that I think a lot of people wanted to get away from. The Prime Minister and many of his brand new MPs in the Labour Party did not want to leave the EU, and I think this is clearly the direction they want to go in. But I think there will be some of his own MPs in red wall constituencies, they will feel, what are people getting who voted for Brexit after the Prime Minister said, we're not going back? Does it feel as if we are? So I think it will certainly be something that we will be discussing endlessly, and for many people will feel like a betrayal.
I mean, the Prime Minister was at great pains to say that there was no return to freedom of movement. But yet again, and I completely accept that the youth mobility detail needs to be worked out. But if you're someone who voted for Brexit, I mean, how does it look that you've just announced that there's going to be thousands, tens of thousands of foreign young people coming here in a way in which they wouldn't have been able to without Sir Keir Starmer?
So I think the view that they take is that when people voted for Brexit, they didn't want to end the Erasmus scheme in which young university students spend a year in a different country and experience a different culture for a bit and then come back again, that we had to leave things like that. That wasn't necessarily what people found annoying about being an EU member. And we do have youth mobility schemes with lots of other countries. We have them with Australia and New Zealand. Young people can come over for a couple of years. We have them with lots of other countries that you wouldn't expect, like Andorra, for example. But of course there is the risk there that lots of people come on them, that it inflates the numbers, that people feel that, they will get into the labour market, and are all these the things that the government promised not to do. So they'll have to manage it very carefully, and that's exactly why we are not hearing the full details today. Today is just the general principle, and everything else is yet to be worked out.
And isn't this just manna from heaven for Nigel Farage? I mean, even if all this works exactly as the government says it will, we're going to have to wait an awful long time to see the data to back that up.
Absolutely. I mean, it was Nigel Farage and a different guise with his previous parties, UKIP and the Brexit Party, who was saying, yes, of course, the Remainers think that being in the EU boosts our economy and high immigration boosts our economy, but that's not what people want. And, this absolutely is a gift to them. They'll be spending the next 3 years saying Keir Starmer surrendered our sovereignty, we are takers of EU rules, we are giving away our fish. Of course they will. And I think that's the difficult thing for Downing Street. They felt that this would be a long-term boost, and they very much stress the long-term nature of it. This food deal doesn't have a time limit on it. It's indefinite. It's all those difficult forms that businesses had to fill in, the businesses that went under because they weren't able to sell their products into the EU, their food products, all these negotiations that had to be done every year on these kind of transitional arrangements. All that's finished. We've got a new deal, and now that's it.
Has this Labour government really nailed the strategy on this? I mean, a quick cursory look at the headlines of all the major papers, certainly for those on the right wing. I mean, we've got the Telegraph saying things like Starmer caves in, the Sun's calling it a betrayal, and the Mail saying it's Keir's Brexit surrender. I mean, has Labour realised, are they just bedding in for the next wee while and keeping their fingers crossed that this is all going to work out? I mean, it's a huge gamble, isn't it?
So what I do pick up from some Labour people is that they did not really roll the pitch for this. Of course, the right-wing newspapers which back Brexit will see it in that way, but when they got in, they said we're going to renegotiate. They put a minister called Nick Thomas-Symonds in charge of it, and we didn't hear from him. I think they were very keen not to do the negotiating in public, as Theresa May did. They didn't want every sort of twist and turn of every meeting ending up in the papers. And the result was we basically heard nothing. And their negotiating strategy was, on all the things we're going to agree to in the end, like youth mobility, let's say we're not going to agree to them. Hence, Yvette Cooper on Sky News just weeks ago saying we have no plans for a youth mobility scheme. And then they agreed one because they felt that you have to sort of only bring in your concessions at the end. So I think the result of the way they've negotiated this, and they insist it was the right way, but was that we didn't know very much, and therefore I think it may come as somewhat of a surprise to people who weren't really looking for news on this, that all this is even happening. And yes, the opinion polls show that lots of people don't think Brexit is going very well, so they think we'll tell people we're going to make it work better, but I think they have not really necessarily prepared the public for this, and I think that is a slight worry of some Labour people I've spoken to. You know, are people ready for this all being back on the agenda again?
Tamara, thanks very much indeed. Lots of analysis of the deal and the bits yet to be signed over on the website, skynews.com. The Daily is back again tomorrow.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malika Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.